Absent. Trustee Hoffman? Here. Trustee Eno?
Here.
Trustee Vella? Absent. Trustee Vettis?
Here.
Student Trustee Bayham? Absent.
If you could please stand, I'll lead the flag salute. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible. Thank you. Are there any members of the public signed up to address the Board of Trustees regarding agenda matters?
No, ma'am.
Great. May I have a motion and a second to approve this agenda?
So moved.
So moved by Hoffman.
Second.
Second by Veras. Roll call, please, Lupe. Sorry.
Trustee Boulna absent. Trustee Henderson?
Yes.
Trustee Hoffman? Yes. Trustee Eno?
Yes.
Trustee Vella absent. Trustee Vettis?
Yes.
Thank you.
So today for the Levine Act training, we have Mikhail Ryder Gordon, LACCD's bond program monitor, to provide the training on our Levine Act. Ms. Ryder Gordon to provide, I don't know if you wanted, is that you? Oh, that's
Trying to get it to come.
the red is on, yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Any discussion from my fellow colleagues? No, what?
No.
What do you mean?
No, at this time, we'll
Yeah.
go ahead and start the presentation. Ms. Gordon, you have the floor. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to get the training from you. So without further ado, let me go ahead and turn the floor over to you and get it started. Thank you.
Thank you, Chancellor Rahman. Thank you, Chair. Okay, today's training is a high-level review of the Levine Act and what the Fair Political Practices Commission, the FPPC, sometimes refers to as the pay-to-play limits and prohibitions. And there've been some recent amendments that went into effect the first of this year that will impact you, and for the most part, they're positive. So this is good. But we're going to look at those changes and how they are going to impact you. But again, this is a broad brush approach to the Levine Act. And as a reminder, I'm not acting as your counsel. This is not legal advice. If you have any questions specific to your individual circumstances as trustees, or if we have parties or vendors in the audience, seek advice from your campaign counsel, your campaign manager, election committee, personal counsel. Okay, so let's get into the Levine Act. In brief, it places limits and sets prohibitions on public officers whilst a proceeding involving a license, a permit, or other entitlement for use is in front of their public agency. Following the date of a final decision being rendered by the agency, in this case, the board, an officer or trustee, in this case, cannot accept, solicit, or direct contributions of more than 500 from any party or that party's agent, or from any participant or that participant's agent, if the trustee knows or has a reason to know the participant has a financial interest. And this prohibition applies regardless of whether the trustee accepted, solicited, or direct that contribution on the officer's own behalf. In other words, your own behalf, or on behalf of another trustee, or on behalf of any candidate for office, or on behalf of any committee. So that's an important broad stroke coverage of the Levine Act. But let's get into some of the definitions here, because what exactly is an officer, a party, a participant, an agent? What does this mean for you? So the Levine Act applies to all individuals it classifies as officers, and that's within a public agency. It's any individual who, whether elected or appointed, has the power to make decisions, participate in decision-making, or influence decisions within a public agency. And trustees fall under this definition, and so are subject to the Levine Act. when, say, for instance, fundraising for a reelection campaign to the board, or even if they're fundraising for election to another office, it's still relevant to you as an active trustee. And when we think about that, for someone who is not a trustee, but running for office for the first time, this act does not apply to them. It's only after you've been elected, okay? So that's when you hear me refer to officer, that's you, the trustees, okay? And who's a party? It's any person or entity who files what they call, the Levine Act refers to as an application, or is the subject of a proceeding involving a license, permit, or other entitlement for use. Now, that may not sound like it's relevant, except for this includes contractors, bidders. It could even include a foundation seeking to use district property for meetings. And then a participant is any person who is not the core part, but who actively supports or opposes, could be that they're against something that's going to come before you for vote, a particular decision in a proceeding, right? Again, it's not just a license or a permit, it's any entitlement, and who has a financial interest in the decision you're making as an agency. So think about subcontractors is a good example, right? And then an agent. An agent, in many respects, can be shorthand for lobbyist, but it does go a little broader than that. It's any party or that's been acting on behalf of that party. So an agent is representing the party or the participant in front of you, and they're being paid for it, right? Now, this could be a lawyer, could be a lobbyist, could be a consultant. If they're communicating with you as the board or as the district, and they're being paid to do this on behalf of, say, a vendor or even a group of vendors, right? Then they fall under the definition of an agent. And an active support or opposition can be lobbying in person, can be testifying at a meeting, engaging in any form of communication with a trustee or a district employee about this interest, whatever it may be, that's coming before you. Okay, and it doesn't include, it doesn't include your communications. If you're chatting with a neighbor and they say, wow, I really don't want to see them tear up the street for this. That's not the same, okay? And then financial interest. This is important because it can be a business entity, it can be employment, directorships, officers, partnerships, trusteeships, management roles, even an investment in a business entity that's worth $2,000 or more, and includes real property, and receipt of income for amounting to more than 500 in the past 12 months, okay? Gifts, receipt of gifts in excess of that 500 in the last 12 months, personal finances. It's a lengthy list. And if you're ever in doubt, this is when you go to your campaign counsel, ask them, is this going to fall under the financial interest decision, okay, or definition? An entitlement to use, it's important to understand that, you know, that's a sort of a catch-all phrase. And it's really meant to cover any proceeding with significant financial impact on those participants. Okay, so it sounds straightforward. Now, yeah, I know this is broad brush and there are a lot, FPPC really does give us a lot of case examples. We'll get to at the end, spoiler alert, you can call them and seek advice from them directly with a scenario. So that's very helpful to know. But we'll cover that as we get to the end. On the positive, the contribution limits have gone up until the end of 2024. So December 31st, 2024, it was 250. It is now 500. And it sounds straightforward, but we're going to get into how we calculate some of this. Now, a bit of history to this, because I know it's new in terms of impacting the district's board. The law's been on the law of the land and on the books in California since 1974. It came in as part of the Political Reform Act, in many respects, in response to the Watergate scandal. California actually has the distinction of being the first to pass such a comprehensive political reform package. And the state takes it very seriously in terms of enforcement, which is important to remember. Now, it extended, it's grown definitely over the decades as to the reach and the restrictions it places. Many of you will be familiar with restrictions on public agency officials. If you were employed with a public agency like the district, you leave employment, you can't go to, say, a vendor and work for them for the first 12 months, right? That comes out of this same Political Reform Act that gave us the Levine Act. Okay, so fast forward to SB 1439, which is when this was passed in the fall of 2022. And it went into effect January 1st, 2023, which is why it began to impact you as trustees directly, right? Because now it applied to members even at local levels, locally elected officials. They include city council members, county supervisors, and boards. And at that point, it was the $250 amount from any party or participant in a 12-month period, which you're all familiar with. It's why you all started having to fill out FPPC forms 460 and 497. Remember, suddenly you had to start disclosing these campaign contributions. That's what prompted it. So now what we get into, right, is these changes that have come into effect as of this January 1st of this year. Okay, we talked about the increase from that 250 threshold to now above 500. So that's good, smaller contributions now. You don't have to worry about those in quite the same way. And that threshold is important to remember, but we're going to talk about how we calculate getting to that amount. Okay. And there's some additional changes that went into effect. So it used to be that the definition of license, permit, entitlement for use included all contracts other than those competitively bid. Personnel and labor contracts were excluded, but it's been modified. So now as of January 1st, right, we are with exemptions here. So now contracts valued under 50,000 do not fall under this. So, right, that makes it a little easier on you. Competitively low bid contracts. And again, low bid is the key here. Labor, personnel, employment contracts, you don't have to worry about, a contract where there is no financial compensation. If it's between the district and another government agency, not a problem. Okay. And if all you're doing is renewing a development agreement or a competitively bid contract, and this gets a little tricky, if there aren't material modifications being made to that contract, it's exempt. Now, material is the definition, for instance, if you were going to extend a vendor contract, that would be material, right? Because it's moved from the contract ends on, say, March 1st, and now you're going to essentially award more money if you say extend through September, right? So that's a material. So it is not exempt. But if you were just saying, we're going to modify the contract to change this one paragraph that says they're going to add some reports on a monthly basis. That's not material. Yes,
Is
trustee,
it the $50,000 contract within a year, or it could be multiple years totaling 50,000?
So if it starts to build up total value, it's thinking of an entity with a single contract. If you had a vendor who, say, had cumulatively with the district 10 of those, then we'd have to look at how those come before you for the vote, right? If they're packaged, if they're individually and they're competitively bid, separated, it would probably continue to be exempt, but we'd have to look at the specific circumstances.
Sorry, just so it's not total, it's total, not time. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so what else can we think about that is not exempt? So building and development applications, conditional use permits, event permits, rulemaking procedures that are exempt would be any general policy decision or rules where you're making a policy that affects a diverse range of, say, vendors, entities, people. That's exempt because it's a broad swath that are going to be impacted by your decision. Yes.
Does this only relate to the actual vote, or does this relate to any?
Even a pending. Now, we're going to get into what pending means in just a moment.
Or directing action, or?
It's a decision that would have a financial impact in some way, even if it's to just say, vote no. Okay. The central tenet here is proceeding is pending. And if we think about what does pending mean? In any decision that comes before the board for consideration. Now, as soon as an item is placed on the agenda for discussion or a decision, right, at a board meeting, it becomes pending. So let me give you an example. We know the district for large projects maybe issue an RFP, say in September, with the intent for it to run through that lengthy procurement process, right? And it's competitively bid. So right now seems okay, except for the fact that we know that according to the public schedule that's come before this, that the process will come to vote for you in, say, the following year of March, right? Because the tender is announced publicly, but we know the schedule because it's been published, right? It'll go through individual independent committee, shortlist, interviews, then, negotiation, intent to award, and then it's going to come before the board. Even though it was competitively bid, it's coming before the board for a decision. You control the final decision. Yes, we're going to accept the recommendation of the independent committee for, say, awarding this contract, or we're not. We have questions, or we're not, we're not happy with the process, whatever it may be. So that's your pending period. As soon as it became public knowledge to you that this would be coming before you, this rule kicks in. So now we're looking at 12 months following the actual decision, but we're also going back in time. Could you have been influenced, you see, to make that vote in favor or right for that vendor that is now coming before you? So I've I've tried to give you a little diagram of how to think forward, backward. Yes, Trustee Hoffman.
I mean, so I think the problem is, how can we as trustees possibly know and predict? Because you just said it applies to contractors, subcontractors, there's a large group. Who's gonna, at the end, be coming before us? Like, we're not involved in that process. So that's a very difficult, I think that's the situation we find ourselves in.
Well, one of the things that the Levine Act, it's very important to understand that the Levine Act says you as the elected official ultimately bear personal responsibility to educate yourselves, to ask questions. If you have a doubt, right, to investigate further. You may not know who's going to be presented, but you'll know a short list, and you can look back at your campaign contributions, and we're going to get into the disclosure period and the recusal option, where you can look back and say, oh, okay, this is coming before us, this massive contract that we're going to vote on. I'm going to look back at my contributions. I didn't know at the time, but I know now, oh, they gave me $600 4 months ago, 6 months ago. I didn't know they were going to be in front of us. Okay, now you know, and we're kind of leaping ahead on the disclosure and understanding and reasonable knowledge, okay? So the relevant time periods are not driven by a calendar year. Trustee Valley, you had a question?
Yeah, I think what maybe Trustee Hoffman meant was we are actually purposely kept away without knowledge on the big RFPs. So in other words, that is a process of our procurement because we want to keep it very fair in the district. So how do we handle that?
So again, we're going to talk about when you find out. Okay, the Levine Act gives you some options once you have reason to know.
What I'm
Trustee
hearing
Hoffman.
is you're going to go through this, but what triggers is when you find out,
Exactly.
because the trustees are not going to know who are the potential folks that are bidding, nor should they know.
No, they shouldn't.
They come before the board. So during that time, that pending period, there may be instances where they're collecting contributions of folks that will ultimately come forward and come before them for an award of a contract. So I think in your presentation, if that's something you can address.
We're about to.
Okay.
Everybody's jumping ahead.
All right, sorry.
Questions. I
Okay.
probably should have told you all to just hold it until we get to the end, and then you can ask all the questions.
Thank you.
That's okay. Okay. So first, we've got to get into, no, we talked about agents and law, because now, one of the important things to understand that an individual is considered an agent, and relevant specifically for this district. Is it an employee or a member of, say, a law firm, architectural firm, engineering or consulting firm, or similar type of entity? They, as an individual, as well as their firm, are considered agents. And that's a really important definition, because we're going to get into your calculation. Then we'll get into those disclosure recusal rules and your options to. Okay, so what we're thinking about, and remember, we're not doing calendar years here. Don't always think, oh, as soon as the clock, the calendar flips over to January 1st, I start over. Instead, you're going from the point of the contribution and the point of the vote, what's come before you to make a decision. You're looking at those two dates. So to cumulative contributions from any one party participant or their agents, right? They have to exceed $500 in that 12-month time frame. So you're aggregating them from the point the decision is happening. And now you're looking back and you're looking forward. Okay. Now, you can't accept donations after you've made that decision from that party or participant or their agent for 12 months going forward. Okay. Now you know. Can't take him. Okay. Counting backward, which is the concern several of you've mentioned, because yes, you don't know necessarily who's coming up before you. And remember, you're thinking about your Form 470s that you're filing. If you have campaign committees or managers, having them keep even simple Excel sheets, right? By contributor, calendar period totals, right? So it's easier. So you don't have to go back and think, okay, when did they give this contribution? Oh, and they also gave me a second contribution. Having your campaign manager or your campaign committee just keep that spreadsheet. You're filing the information on your 470s anyway. It makes it much easier. Group it by the party and their contributor. And remember, if an executive of an agent, a firm that falls under the agent definition, also gives you money, put them with that entity for that total calculation. Okay. If they have a lobbyist they've paid to then donate to you, again, make sure it's tied to that organization so you have a total for that 12-month period. Okay. Then we get to what you get to do for disclosure. Prior 12 months. So now you know this entity is coming before you. And you think, did I receive more than 500 from that party, the participant or their agent in the prior 12 months? That's, again, this is the value of keeping that log, because it's easy to then see the total amount. You know, if it comes out to 490, 500 each, you're fine. No problem. It's 501. Okay, now we have to make a decision. Okay. You have 30 days. And this is when you know or should have known. Now, the should have known is if they tell you in a board packet 3 weeks ahead of time, you're voting to approve this contract with this vendor. That's your, right? Because this is your point of knowledge. If it were somehow a surprise to you, it wasn't published, you sat down in a board meeting and they said, oh, we forgot to put it on the agenda, which they can't really do, but you know, somehow it was a huge surprise. It's now I know. Okay, I go back 12 months, I look at my total. Am I over that? Is my $501 or above? Okay, now I have 30 days. It used to be only 2 weeks, used to be only 14 days. So this is a big improvement for this year. 30 days, okay? Now you can return the money.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
So we don't know who's applying. Let's just say we're doing a big contract. Let's just, okay,
Sure.
for argument's sake.
Sure.
We're raising money, we're running for re-election.
Okay.
And at the point that it's put on the board agenda,
Mhm.
we see who the chosen
Mhm.
vendor is.
Mhm.
We then go back, according to what you said, 12 months, see if that vendor has contributed. If that vendor, if we say, oh, yes, at that point, that's that counts within the 30 days because we didn't know beforehand. We just are now finding out.
That's right.
We can return the contribution. So everybody else who also applied for this contract, it's fine to keep their contributions?
It's not. Until the contract is awarded, no. Because hypothetically,
How are we gonna know who everybody else was? Because that information isn't always disclosed. So
it's when
we
you
need
know.
clarity.
It's when you know. And that's a question to go back to your campaign counsel, because I'm not giving you legal advice here. I'm not your
Yeah.
counsel.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you.
Hypothetically. Comes before a vote, and for whatever reason, you're not satisfied with the selection. And you say, you know what, there are too many questions. We're not going to approve this contract. Who's the number two? Or we want to rebid. You've got to anticipate that it is a little messy. There are not perfect rules for every situation you're going to encounter. It's the rule of thumb is when you know or reasonably should have known. I'll give you another example. If it's an,
Before you do,
Thanks.
in this situation, you have a scenario where someone has been selected. We don't know who all the others are. So you don't know otherwise to return any contributions. If for some reason the board takes action not to approve that contract, they're still not gonna know who the second.
that's right.
So at this point, they're still under the should not know or don't know,
You
right?
don't know.
So
That's right.
in my opinion, that's, and again, I'm not an attorney, they still don't know. They may come back and say, we're going with the second individual. At that point, that gets agendized. Then the trustees see it on an agenda, then it comes back. At that point, they know. So that gets triggered at that. And I know we're working with hypotheticals, but until they know,
That's right.
Yeah,
there is no obligation on the part of the trustees to return money. It may, does that sound accurate?
That's reasonably accurate with, again, understanding reasonably should have known. So
you can't say reasonably should have known because we are kept out of the process.
We are
We
purposely.
don't know.
That's
So
the
how,
issue.
where does the reasonably should have known come in?
So can we give an example? Because I think it would be very beneficial to you because I don't think you understand the procurement process of LACCD.
I do.
Okay, I'm sorry if you don't think you do.
It's okay.
So what it is that our biggest one, the PMO,
I know.
is purposely blinded for us
I know.
due to previous reports that there was influence. So we don't know out of the 500 top CM, PM firms in the world, how am I, please don't come because maybe in a year, in 3 years, maybe you might want to apply to this. So, and this is why it's so important because we rather have counsel tell us, you know what? Never accept money from anybody because your district is so complicated and convoluted.
Truth to that.
Okay, but we're running around in circles here. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but unless somebody deals with the procurement process that LACCD has now embraced, which I'll give you an example. We were at Southwest. I asked, who's applying? General counsel told me, you can't know. And I said, well, what do you mean? I just want to know who applied. Nope, Mr. Valley, you can't know. I mean, it was public, it was recorded. Okay, so later I get an email from our general counsel who told me, you knew, you can't vote. I said, no, I didn't. I have recordings. I can prove to you that you told me I couldn't know. So I think we're okay with continuing this presentation, but I think general counsel has a big job in explaining this and I demand it because it is not fair for me to waste my time here unless we're going to deal with these small issues that are causing huge problems for this district. And by the way, our government relations program, our staff should be involved in talking to the VNAC people. I don't know how active we were. And I put that on our government relations person to be talking to the state legislature. It shouldn't be just one trustee because they work there. It should be the district. It should be the chancellor. Previous chancellor I had no clue if they were influencing this decision in Sacramento. I was in chair of public affairs. So, I hate to put a damper on it. I'm under the weather. Ironically got the flu in Sacramento when we were advocating. But, I don't know what my colleagues think, but I mean, are we going to go forward with the presentation, run around in circles, come back to the same thing?
So if I can offer, Trustee Vela, so your points are well made. I did chat with Council Prieto. We're taking note of the specifics and we're going to do a follow-up on
No,
those.
we need to fix it.
Yes,
We're not here to just learn. I read the Living Act. I've been emailing the FPPC myself.
Yeah.
This is what I didn't want. I didn't want a presentation about it. I wanted solutions. Our current general counsel said we have this little, hat thing where you pick a name and okay, let's think about those solutions. What can we do to tell Sacramento, hey, we're more complicated. We're not city of Rialto. This is getting kind of weird.
Yeah.
And I just can't do this anymore in this space because we have things to do. There's urgency around here. If general counsel says, you know what, just stop accepting money altogether and let's do campaign finance and push it, in the state or in the feds, and let's do that. But this is getting a little bit, honestly, condescending, not your fault, but from the state legislature. It's becoming a bit, I believe, my opinion, targeted. And, I think the state legislature should hear that because it's just annoying at this point. Sorry, it's my personal opinion. I'm an elected official. I can say whatever the hell I want. So.
Okay.
Sorry.
Where it's fine. The only time a cure is not permitted is when you knowingly or willfully accepted the money. And in most cases, this is after the decision, or if you secretly knew and never disclosed it, which would raise a whole host of other legal issues for you, leading up to a vote that you did know was pending in front of you. And that's it. So if you saw it on your agenda 3 weeks beforehand and you accepted a donation then the day before the vote, well, of course, that's right. That's willful. That's knowing. Then you can't return it. But you can recuse yourself. And, with other conflicts of interest, you can disclose in a myriad of ways. You can return the monies in an abundance of caution. Yes, sir.
Would you return, let's say someone got a $10,000 donation, would you return 9,500 or would you return the 10,000?
You could return 9,500 and keep the remaining 500 and not disclose. That's right. It's above 500. So the interpretation is that 500, right? That's why I said the 501. When you hit 501, you disclose at 500. That's the current interpretation of that. Okay, so you could do that. And you must disclose once you know and recuse yourself if you haven't been able to return that money in the allotted period of time, in that 30-day period when you've become aware. So you have options here. It really comes down to, willful blindness. If you were notified in advance, and then you still proceeded and you failed to disclose, failed to return the money, that would be willful blindness. If you're aware of the contribution, you're aware that they are and it's been disclosed publicly, right? You can't claim I didn't know. So if it's an agenda or if you solicited directly from that vendor, knowing that they were going to be coming up before you, right? And I understand you don't know always, but there are plenty of scenarios outside of just pure procurement for the district where this could happen. So just being aware of that. If you're soliciting, keep that list. A lot of this is record keeping, checking those records.
Just a few comments and sort of I sit on a committee that's part of Metro, and I get a list whenever I go to my meetings there of which contracts are up.
There you go.
That's kind of our agenda. Our agenda is plus 100 items. Sometimes it's difficult to know how they, because we don't describe how they're bid. So I think perhaps maybe this is something for the general counsel, that if there could be a sheet delivered to us, same way that Metro or AQMD does it, that these contracts are up. And if you received a contribution of more than 500, to be notified or notify the council's office to do that. But we just have a long list of contracts, and, even to just, so to say that we're aware is challenging, because if you look at board docs, and if you're scanning board docs sometimes and you're not going through sort of every meticulous, there's stuff that takes more, it's hard. We get this and we're expected to do it within a short time period to go over every single detail. Sometimes there's not even accompanying materials to describe the process, because it could be competitively bid, and fine, you move it aside. And but to say that we have our list, I think the district also has to produce its list, and then that delivered in an email format to us can say that we are now informed of all the types of contributions that fit the criteria that could be Levine Act impacted. So I'll say that on one side, because I think that's just a process thing for us. It takes a little bit more time in agenda preparation, but just to understand, unless we have the expectation in the agenda item to list how it was procured, or that this could be a Levine Act, sort of scenario. I think that needs a little bit of cleanup as well. So whether it's just, like I said, an email to us that informs, or if it's a cleanup on the agenda items so that we can be aware. It's a very long list of contributions that we have to go through within 4 days, 5 days before we're prepping for a meeting. The second thing I would comment.
May I respond on that? So Trustee
Yeah.
Vettis, we, as of this month, we began flagging Levine Act items. And those will continue going forward. So if you look at each item that's on there, say subject to Levine Act.
Sure.
So we started that, and that's in the memo you received also from General Counsel. If you want to summarize the list, we can talk to staff, but each item that is subject to it is already flagged on this month's agenda.
Okay, good.
That's a good idea.
And
Yes.
okay, all right. So and it's noticeable. So I think that's valuable. But like I said, other agencies, they deliver you a memo ahead of time.
Yeah.
It's an easy sort of cross check. Here, we're still going through the process of going through our.
We'll look at a
Summary,
memo
right?
type. Yeah.
Yeah, that's not something I personally
Right.
control for you, but.
Right. No, that's why I answer. That's why I answer. So
But I think what needs, thank you, Trustee Bettis. I think, by the way, thank you for that, because I do think what needs to be set up is the no kitchen for this district, because I really, we really have to get that really tight, because no one should assume who knows what. I mean, it's we're hearing from our presentation that the no happens when possibly we might, for example, get a presentation on that, hey, we're going to go out for an RFP for public affairs for whatever, but we can't guess who is going, because I think the issue is like, we need to.
It's when you know.
But is it,
Focus on the when you know.
do you know about the RF? That's what's weird about it. Okay, so we start where oh, sorry, go ahead.
General Counsel, you could probably, I had a conversation with General Counsel a few months ago, and I said, look, the bottom line is that the relationship between the board and the district with regard to, because a lot of times the district folks are like, well, that's a campaign thing, right? And we're like, yeah, but can you let us know, right? It's kind of been a yin and a yang, right? Kind of everyone pointing at each other, right? What this ultimately does, I think it's not simple, but basically says to us, hey, we got to pay attention. Well, we're kind of used to, but I don't think the district is used to having to inform in order for for operationally to function, right? Because you may have 7 trustees who are conflicted out of everything, And they may say, if they continue to be on their trajectory of saying that's your problem, then functionality doesn't occur on this end, right? So I think the presentation today is just, it's a one-way street. Hey, right? We haven't had the conversation with the district to say, what is the balance between you informing us, but not giving us counsel advice on this, which they can't do in order to keep functioning. So one last point. So you recall the conversation. I think what is considered notice, we can create a board rule with general counsel's office to say, at some point, something is going to say Levine Act notice, right? Yeah. Very bold, kind of like this, that says Levine Act notice, right? So that we can accept that because it's too huge, to your point, right? It's too huge. So they have to come up with some level, they have to have their training, but I think it's more going to be emotionally difficult for the district to get a sense that they actually owe some responsibility to the district to actually inform us on stuff that may actually have a campaign effect.
Got it. Well, I apologize to you because I thought we were coming into a workshop to discuss how we can do those solutions for us, because we've already had the trainings on the. What I do think is, and it's safe to say in general counsel, I think we can discuss it further. But for me, what I'm learning from this is that on the no side, okay, typically what us as trustees are told is that we will, hey, we are going to come and present to you guys that we're going to go out for an RFQ for, let's say, audio services. Okay. So I know that there's going to be an RFP because we get it presented here. I know they tell us the timeline, like it's going to come out in March, whatever. We're now in January, right? I think that what I'd like to know is that, does that trigger, because I'm not going to go what individual companies are going to apply. So does that trigger to me or the district? Can the district help guide us and say, hey, because we're coming up with an RFP in 3 months on audio, I would suggest that you do not invite or solicit from audio companies, because that's the issue I'm getting at, right? And I'm happy to not do that. Like, for example, I'm happy to have a fundraiser and not invite potentials. It's going to be hard because I don't know who. I mean, they don't know if they're going to go out for the RFP. But to predict who's going to go out for the RFP.
Trustee Vela, this is kind of like when, with the creation of Obamacare, right? There was a whole new bureaucracy that the legislature essentially said you have to invent in this process.
And I will invent. I just want to do the right thing. And I think what's happening is that, and I'm just being very serious here, is that it is no fault to the Levine Act. It is the district that has failed us to provide us with guidance, from our general counsel side on what we can do. I was left exposed this last election. It was very scary, and there was no support. As a matter of fact, there was some punishment. And I felt, I know I don't like airing our dirty laundry because it's a public meeting, but it affected my health. It was not fun. And I could, so I could go on, but now I think we could turn the leaf and we could hopefully with our new general counsel create some solutions to this. Sorry, that's what happened.
So a couple of things that we're jotting down to move forward. Thank you for the trustees for the comments. On today's board meeting, we have flagged the items that are subject to Levine Act. But what I think we're also going to do as a proactive measure, and we'll talk through this, is possibly be able to inform the board when particular contracts are just initiating, Trustee Vela, that may be subject to Levine Act. So on the front end, now the question then becomes, and we'll check, is that give notice that you don't need to have at that point? But we'll talk through those. We'll do a follow-up with more specific scenarios to us. That's a takeaway from today, moving away from the general to the actual specifics and scenarios that would be applicable to us. So we'll do the follow-up.
No, I expect it. Yeah. I expect the district to come up to help us. You can't leave us on our own.
We will do our information to you so that you can make informed decisions.
And I'm willing to put my part. I'm willing to get my campaign people involved, even a campaign lawyer. I have no problem with exerting that type of resources, but zero response from the district is unacceptable and it needs to change.
Yes.
And
Trustee Hobb.
I think I'd like to also make a suggestion that when we do get information, there's just one point person at the district, and maybe that's you, General Counsel Prieto, because I think we have a situation where there are some staff members who control contracts who have literally said, if you donate to a trustee or you have any communication with the trustee, you will not get this contract. And that's gotten back to me. And that's the same as saying, if you don't give me money, you're not getting a contract. So that's
agree.
very dangerous, and that puts our district at risk. And I have talked to at least 4 folks that I know that have had business with in front of the district that have been told that. And so I think that's something we also need to deal with.
I agree with you, Trustee
So
Hoffman.
there should be one point person.
And I think we need to have a board rule that prohibits employees from letting vendors or potential vendors know that they should not participate in trustees fundraisers. We need to have that in black and white, because otherwise it's going to create a big mess. And, you know, whether or not the intention is good or bad, that is also violating, I believe, freedom of speech, because fundraising, it was determined by the Supreme Court that it was freedom of speech. So we could take this all the way to the Supreme Court and be on the right side of history, that no one should intervene from the district on what to tell people. That is our decision.
Right.
Whether we want to accept money or not, that is none of your business. And we will recuse ourselves or we will send it back. And you don't get to determine whether I'm you or not. That's something that I can discuss with my general counsel as well. So leaving it at that.
I think the only point of today was to say, here's the information. I think that's it. We have to direct our staff to create the type of infrastructure that is going to effectuate everyone's safety.
Well, you know what? I'm glad we're having this talk now, because guess what? We're gonna have another special board meeting to discuss these solutions and remedies. I'm down.
We have time.
I'm down for that. And we could let the presentation go. I'll shut up. I'm fine with that.
Can I just offer one?
Please.
I know we're down to the last couple pages of the
That's okay.
presentation. So I just, from remembering when this was started a few years back in the halls of Sacramento, and initially, actually, the community college district was not included.
Right.
The first rounds of things. It's in Sacramento and everywhere, whether it's local or it's very hard to say I am opposed to items that are dealing with corruption. Challenge is we're confronting a lot of procedural and
Yes.
process questions, and there was a limited understanding, because I think some of this was sort of geared initially to, I believe it was cities and counties, and not necessarily K through 12 or community
That's
college,
right.
which oftentimes, like for example, like there's lack of clarity on piggyback, you know, procurement issues where we use things that were done by the community college league and those kinds of situations that are still probably still pending and ambiguous in terms of what's here. I would and our competitively bid, not just low bid. I mean, we have, you know, special, you know, highest value bid that has honestly a more extreme scoring, you know, sort of format than just whatever the lowest dollars and cents was. And we went to that to deal with sort of corruption issues, dealing with, you know, what is it called? Change orders, right? So we deal with one. Now we're actually being told, go back to that format because it's clean. That's necessary, you know, cleaner. But what I would suggest is many of the things that were on this table, we may want to pursue, whether it's the general counsel office, our legal team, chancellor, or whoever else is a set of potential changes. Because we were sort of tossed in afterwards without understanding the particular nuances that may be involved in procurement process that we deal with. The larger we are sometimes, the less, you know, the further away things seem because it's such a big operation. The fact that we have multi-campuses and multi-districts, we could be receiving recommendations from one place unrelated to things that we may even be aware of. But I think there is a number of potential recommended legislative changes. This is going to be an evolving and ongoing process. Obviously, when they first put it in, clearly there was problems with it. So we have a set of improvements. I know, Assemblymember McKinnon had a number of concerns she raised over the years. I don't think had them all answered, but there may be very specific examples that we can provide. We can certainly provide competitive bidding, some insights based on what we do, based on what we learn, based on, you know, whether it's our qualification issues or whether it's our highest or best value process, that can be really educational to potentially put those items in the exempt spaces as well. Because they've only been so limited in one space. It's almost like I'm going to get my land use entitlement and build my building or build my
Right,
development project.
right.
We have rarely see
See.
development projects come by our way. And a lot of the rules are built for that
For the permitting.
entitlement,
Yeah.
context.
Yeah.
So if we can get something that relates to what we do with a set of recommendations, with people who know the Levine Act, I think that would be valuable for us to potentially lobby and maybe even think about introducing a bill that cleans up the messiness that exists that doesn't work that well. So Metro just did it as well. Metro had a big ethics reform.
Yeah.
That they
Yeah.
carried last year to deal with the years of complications and messiness, because there'd be times when you'd see nobody in a Metro board meetings actually voting and doing the findings and necessity just to decide. That became a regular practice when that was actually supposed to be the sort of
The exception.
the exception to the situation has become the regular practice.
Great. There's a couple more slides. And in
well,
the interest of time, are we good?
We're fine.
Okay.
It's really just a reminder, you know, when in doubt, to check with your
Sure.
own campaign council, you know, set the tone at the top, act with integrity, you know this.
So I'm just going to recap based off of what the concerns were amongst my board colleagues. So our current asks are to make sure that we are getting an active list of all vendors on agendas so we know what we're voting on, to possibly create a board policy on the Levine Act notice, get information on upcoming types of contracts so we know the cycles and so we can better prepare as we post things. We want to make sure we have a point of contact at LACCD, and so we can ask our questions in regard to this. And then in a big picture, because our district is so unique, possibly look at policy reform. So that I will work with the folks that
Yeah.
on
Good work.
getting some of those for you.
That's great.
Okay, thank you.
But you're now at least aware of the latest updates.
Yes.
You know,
No.
they are incremental improvements. so,
Right.
you know,
No, we thank you for your time. Yeah.
take what we-
We're just a very complicated
it is. It's
beast.
very
And so we are
complicated
working.
district With a lot of.
Yeah, and we want to
unique-
make sure we hold the
unique
utmost integrity,
situations.
right, and we know how to move together. So thank you so much. So I'm just gonna, are there any members of the public signed up to address the board on non-agenda items? No, ma'am. No. May I have a motion to adjourn?
Yep.
So move, by Walna, I'll second. Roll call, please, or
can do
unless
that.
anyone opposes, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.